This is part 2 of my analysis of the short story Mrs Mahmood by the Nigerian writer Segun Afolabi. We left off at the point where Mr Mahmood has just left work early after his confrontation with the teenaged shoplifter. He is still feeling restless and out of sorts after the encounter and his near striking of the insolent boy. He calls in at the supermarket on the way home to buy food and a bottle of wine for dinner. He asserts that this is because he wants to surprise his wife Isabel, but he also lets slip that he is still feeling the after effects of the events of the day. I needed something to do with my hands, to keep myself occupied. We now get an insight into the relationship that Mr Mahmood has with Isabel. We can see very quickly that she understands him a whole lot better than he understands himself, and that he can't fool her that everything is okay when it isn't. I waved the bowl of rice about so that steam plumed into the air. It was supposed to be a jovial gesture. She took one good look at me. "What's wrong?" she said. Mr Mahmood lets on that privately he resents the fact that she can, on occasion, treat him as though he is a child. Sometimes she strikes a tone with me that isn't appropriate. "Now then," she might say quietly, "tell me all about it." Her hands held gently together, her voice smooth, modulated. I know she would like children of our own, but me, I'm not so sure. He explains to her what has happened, but note the language he uses. The shoes marching out defiantly. The use of a synecdoche here to dislocate the trainers from the boy wearing them personifies them almost as though they had a mind of their own, and gives an indication of Mr Mahmood's feeling of alienation and his sense that the world is against him. We can tell that Mr Mahmood feels ashamed of his barely restrained impulse to hit the boy. I have always thought of myself as a particular kind of man, the kind that could never strike a child, no matter what. But that's all over now. Note how once again, when he is faced with failure, he can't see a way of coming back from it. This certainty is reflected in the very brief sentences here. Isabel, however, is much more pragmatic about the whole episode. "Well, Mr Mahmood," she shrugged, but she didn't sound upset. "Theft is something you just have to get used to. I thought you'd be used to it by now." When he clarifies that it is actually his barely suppressed violence that is the problem, her equanimity does not falter, and she is just as offhand about this as about the theft. "Oh, that's nothing new," she said. "I've sometimes wanted to hit out, you know. You can't help that." It is worth remembering at this point Mr Mahmood's earlier assertion that he strives for understanding, and noting, in contrast, how effortlessly this empathy, both for her husband and for the boy, comes to Isabel as though it is second nature. "It's only natural to feel anger at that kind of behaviour," she continued. "They're doing it for a reason, though. You have to remember that." Mr Mahmood is unsettled by her calm reasoning and simple acceptance, not only of his own behaviour, but also that of the teenager. I wasn't quite sure how to take this, the ease with which she'd said it. Mr Mahmood is restless, not only due to the events of the day, the aching in his limbs from the unaccustomed sprint, and the alcohol that he has drunk, but also because his reaction to what has happened is at odds with that of his wife. The pair decide to go out for a drive so that Mr Mahmood can clear his head. Note how the movement of the car and the fresh air make him feel calmer, more refreshed. As they drive along, Mr Mahmood begins to reflect on his wife's free and easy nature, which is so at odds with his own more judgmental approach. He seems to be overly disapproving of her, criticising her for appearing to expect everything to be handed to her on a plate. Isabel, I think, was led to expect an undemanding life, to have things easily provided, frequent trips around the world. As he continues to ponder, however, we realise that this is more a reflection of his own sense of inadequacy rather than how he feels about her, and we really get a sense of self-pity and bitterness in the following lines. I don't think she ever envisaged being with someone like me. It must have come as a surprise, gone against everything her parents had encouraged her towards, to suddenly find on her wedding day me and not some high-flown tycoon exchanging marital vows. We only have his word for it, after all, that her mother was crestfallen and that it wasn't difficult to notice that Mr. Hamilton put on a brave face. We also learn that things haven't always been smooth sailing for the couple. There was a time fraught with difficulties when I wasn't sure what we were doing, but that's past. I fought for Isabel the way I fought for most things in my life. I know she did not want me in the beginning, not for a long time after that. It's interesting to note that Mr. Mahmood characterises himself as someone who is prepared to fight for what he wants, and yet he gave up his dream of being an athlete without doing so. Mr. Mahmood goes on to reflect on the pair's travelling around the city and the country in their spare time. Even when they get on the wrong bus, there won't be any panic, a rushing towards the exit. Quite often, we'll remain seated and let the vehicle lead the way. He puts this down to the fact that they have both had a nomadic existence, living in a number of different places, and the way that this makes an indelible mark on your identity, making you more adaptable to unpredictability and change. Perhaps it comes from living a fractured existence, all that broken geography, learning to live a different life. Note, though, that both the adjectives fractured and broken are intrinsically negative and suggest that Mr. Mahmood may be conflicted about his inability to feel settled. Mr. Mahmood goes on to reflect on what his wife has said about his own personality. Isabel once said I was abrupt with people. I cut them off, that underneath a warm exterior I harboured a cold nature. He puts this down to having something to do with living in the city. I often strike a particular note with people, and I can't say why. Note that he earlier remarked that he found something inherently hostile about the city, describing it as having a hard, brittle edge, which perhaps affects how people relate to one another. He admits that he makes a show of being interested in the sales representatives who come to the shop, making them feel as if they are the most important encounter of my day, that what they are saying bears close attention. What they are doing is admirable, so that he only has to give them the minimum, the bare bones. He notes, however, that sometimes it is obvious that they realise he is doing this and that it becomes awkward because it's a signal to me that they might want something in exchange. Muscle, blood, a heart, something more vibrant. And I know that there isn't any of that, only bones. His reference to lacking muscle, blood, a heart, something more vibrant, suggests that he feels somehow incomplete and lifeless. In contrast, he goes out of his way to try to strike up a genuine rapport with his customers, whom he treats as if we'll meet again. That's a favourite part of my job, the interaction, so I try to get it right. It comes as a surprise, then, that when someone famous, whom Mr. Mahmood has seen during the summer on my television screen, comes into the shop with his son to buy some football boots, Mr. Mahmood feels unable to interact with him at all. Instead, he observes the incident from a distance, half-heartedly checking the stock. The way in which a few customers sidled up for autographs, and his realisation that he was in the last Olympics, that one, an Olympian, he had a winner's smile, seems to remind Mr. Mahmood of what he had dreamt of for himself, adulation and accomplishment in equal measure, all those years ago. When the man catches Mr. Mahmood staring at him, Mr. Mahmood has a moment of crisis. I turned away. I think I lost my nerve then. I don't remember. I just felt weak. Overwhelmed by his maelstrom of conflicting feelings, consisting perhaps of shyness, awe, regret, and envy, Mr. Mahmood is unable to talk to the man. Instead, in the first instance, he goes out to his office to hide before slipping out of the building. He acknowledges that it was wrong of me, but he can't stop himself. Rather than turn round when he gets to Charing Cross, he just kept moving. Overcome by the desire to escape, to go and go and go, be carried somewhere far away, he gets on a random bus. Note the polysyndeton and repetition here in go and go and go, which really evokes his instinct for movement and travel in times of stress. Note how he sees the literal race that he ran at the age of 17 and all the training that led up to that moment as a metaphor for life in general and for the success that has always been just out of his grasp. It is a helpless feeling to know that no matter how hard you run, however much you exert yourself, you are never going to move faster than this, overtake the man in front. Perhaps I understood that then, when I was 17. We can discern the frustration he feels at the sense of never being able to catch up with the person ahead of you. The lesson he feels that he learned all those years ago was that there are times when you need to cut your losses, to metaphorically as well as literally wear a different pair of shoes and walk rather than run in another direction from the one you had planned. He has learnt another lesson from his successful pursuit of the shoplifter and his subsequent mishandling of it that he can also apply to his life. That however well you succeed in your pursuits, there will always be an element of regret. When he gets off the bus, he finds himself in a park where there is an athletics track, which seemed warm and buoyant beneath me. Note the use of the positive, welcoming and energising adjectives here, which almost seem to be inviting him to run. His thoughts return to the teenage shoplifter and how he almost struck him. We can sense his confusion, not only at his own motivations, but also at the boy's reaction. I don't know why I behaved the way I did that day in the shop with the thief. He had looked so angry with me, as if I had been in the wrong. The way the italic font puts emphasis on the pronoun I here suggests that Mr. Mahmood is beginning to re-evaluate the incident as he wonders what would have happened if Cedric had not been there to prevent it. He reveals that he is scared of the low threshold of his anger that can come to the surface when he is faced with unpredictable and challenging behaviour, and professes to feel more comfortable with the inanimate stock in his shop that he can order, restock and rearrange to his heart's content. Sometimes I think I would take better care of my shop, the expensive shoes, the labelled clothing, the sports equipment, than I would my own child, and I am blind with fear. He then proceeds to remove his jacket and begin limbering up, slowly, deliberately, the way I had been taught, before taking up position in a sprint start and casting his eye to the end of the track. He begins to run. And then I was sailing, the wind unfurling round my ears, the soft rubber track making me feel supple. He is running for the pure sake of running, for the first time since he was 17. There is no one to race against, no competitor ahead of him on the track, no teenage shoplifter to pursue down the street. Note the use of the verb sailing here to suggest the speed, fluidity and ease of a boat on the sea. The way in which the wind unfurls or unfolds around his ears develops this metaphor and evokes a feeling that he is perhaps blowing away the cobwebs and clearing his mind. The way the track under his feet makes him feel supple suggests that he feels invigorated and young once more, and he carries on running farther than he originally intended. When he comes to a halt, he realises that he has been watched by a group of children who've been cheering him on. The story ends with him having come to an epiphany. Perhaps I failed in my life, in my endeavours. Perhaps the meaning of it all has passed me by. I cannot say for certain that it has. I just don't know. I cannot say that in a year from now I will be lulled to sleep by underground trains. I could be someplace very far from here. Sometimes I long for heat. He realises that there is a lot in life that is uncertain. Note the multiple references to being unsure here with perhaps, perhaps. I cannot say for certain. I just don't know. I cannot say, and I could be. He seems almost reconciled to this. He doesn't know a lot of things, but that's okay. What he does know, however, is that if he cuts through all the white noise created by his self-doubt and regret, his wife is there as his lodestar, the one central steady presence that will continue to guide and inspire him wherever he may go. If it came right down to it, if I thought about it clean out, pared back the skin, the tired flesh, and arrived at the bones, I realised the one certainty in my life is Isabel. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques, and English literature texts.